We're back. We are going to use the embossing pad, and we're going to emboss down here in the water area. So for the water, we're going to do the same thing that we did before with the black, and that is we're just going to apply the embossing ink, if you will, to the bottom half of the stamp where the water is. And it might be easier for you if you do it from the top. I don't know. Try to go kind of fast. So I was wondering if you could actually make embossing ink at home, and I found a recipe, and it seems that it's mostly Vaseline and vegetable oil. So I don't think it'll actually dry, but we still want to go kind of fast. Because I'm doing 2 cards, I'm going to do the same thing to both of my waters. After putting down the embossing, I see, and I did the same thing the other night, that I didn't get full coverage. So what I'm doing is I'm taking my paintbrush that's dry, and I'm dipping it in the embossing powder, or I'm sorry, the embossing ink. Okay, I'm going to get this wet. I've got dried up glue on it. Anyway, you want your paintbrush to be pliable, and you can dab your paintbrush on your embossing pad and pick up that ink, and you can use your paintbrush to paint the embossing ink into the missing areas. So that's what I'm doing. I'm going to do that on both of my waters. You're going to do that on yours as well. Sorry, this is focusing in and out. I don't know how to make it stop. I have the same problem with other videos. So go ahead and do that on your card. I'm going to try to actually make some embossing ink. I'll report back how well that works. Embossing powder is quite a mess, so I like to get another piece of paper to put underneath when I spread the powder. I'm going to use a kind of white powder. I'm going to just grab a piece of printer paper. I'm going to sprinkle this embossing powder over. Then I'm going to pick it up, and I'm going to dump it back into, okay, it didn't all go back into that. Forget that. I'm just going to dump it onto the paper. Okay, and then I'm going to set these strips aside. I don't want to waste the embossing powder because this stuff's expensive. So I'm going to dump it from my paper back into the container. I'm now going to apply the embossing powder to my black strip and my green strip, because remember, I'm doing 2 cards at once. So I'm going to apply the embossing ink to the entire stamp, and then I'm going to stamp back over where I already stamped on this green one. And I might not get good coverage. I seem to have trouble getting good, clear impressions out of my stamps. I don't know why that is. I'm pretty new to stamping. I'm guessing some of you have the answer. Please share. That one actually looked pretty good. But if you're not happy with your coverage, again, you can take your paintbrush and you can dip it in the embossing ink. Okay, it's not really much of a dip, but you can rub it around in the embossing ink, and you can try to fill in the parts that you feel you didn't get very good coverage on. And it's really supposed to be an accent, so it's not really the end of the world if we don't get perfect coverage. So there you go. I've got that on my green strip. I'm now going to do it on my black strip. Now remember, on the black strip, we haven't applied any ink. So this embossing ink is going to be the first thing that goes on the black strip. Okay, we want to try to center this, and we don't want to stamp it all the way down at the bottom. We're going to stamp it a little bit more toward the top. We're going to try to get a nice good impression here. That's a pretty good impression. I think I want to do 2 different color embossing inks or powders. I think I kind of want the clear stuff, clear whitish stuff on the black. And it turns out to be this really cool iridescent rainbowy color. So that's going to be the same color that we put on both waters. You know the drill, sprinkle your embossing powder, move it around to get good coverage. Trying to get as much excess off as I can. Pretty happy with how that turned out. So I've got this green embossing powder. You know, my first time using embossing powder for actual embossing was just the other day. I've had this powder. I use it for different stuff. I got a different sheet of paper here because I don't want to mix my green powder with my white powder. So I've got a different collection sheet. So yeah, the other day was my first time using embossing powder for embossing. I will often mix it in with some translucent Sculpey Fimo, basically polymer clay. And I'll really mix it up because it'll give me a nice, cool kind of opal look. So if I want to make faux opals, that's how I do it. So yeah, for all these years, I've had this embossing powder. Never used it for embossing. Last night, making that sample card is the first time I used it for embossing. So this is a smaller container. I need to put it into Tupperware. So we're going to take our heat tool and we're going to heat up the pieces that we put the embossing powder on. And I just think that is so cool. If you don't have a heat gun, I'm guessing you could use a blow dryer. So I've never used, embossing, my first time embossing was last night. But before I had my heat gun, I would use a blow dryer as a heat gun for my watercolor. And it worked well. So I'm guessing you could do the same with the for embossing. So now we've got to decide, what do we want to do about these trees and this cloud? I'm thinking that I want to put some embossing ink on them. You know, these are already cut out, whereas these weren't cut out. So the placement on these is going to be a little bit more critical than it was on the other one. Okay, so I'm stamping my cloud onto the cloud that's been cut out. I'm going to have to pull that off. Okay, I'm going to, here's the one that came with my paper pumpkin set. So the first time you get a paper pumpkin kit, they'll send you a clear block. You frequently get stamps, I guess, with paper pumpkin. This is only going to be my second month with paper pumpkin. But from what I understand, you get stamps. Both kits that I've got from Paper Pumpkin had stamps. So did that for that tree. Got another tree. And I don't know, this might be too much on the embossing, but, you know, we'll see. We'll roll with it, see how it goes for us. If you want your card to be a little bit more understated, well then maybe don't emboss all these little elements. Pulling out the paper that I used for the clear embossing powder. And these little pieces here, the hunter and the birds, I'm not putting embossing powder on them. It's going to be a true silhouette. So here I am sprinkling the embossing powder on these. Going to carefully pick these up. I guess this probably would have been a good time to grab some tweezers. kind of going to knock the excess off, set it aside. I'm going to do that to each of my pieces. And these are the trees that come with that Mystic Magic Mountain Air set. So I think, what is it? Majestic Mountain is the die. Mystic Mountain. Don't know what that is. So Majestic Mountain is the die set, and Mountain Air is the stamp set. And those trees and cloud came with that set. I'm going to dump the excess embossing powder back into its Tupperware. So I'm going to go off camera and heat these up to get the embossing powder to melt and set.